me, Anja. My pronouns are she and her, and welcome back to my channel for my March TBR. So, unlike my January and my February TBR, I've decided that with this list, and maybe in the future as well, I've decided to include a little bit more information about each book, because with the previous months, I focused mainly on my excitement for the book, and less about the details or the synopsis of the book. But for this month, I've decided to do both, because I feel like a synopsis gives you more information about a book. I understand that some people find a synopsis to be too much of a spoiler for the book, but for me, I need the synopsis to pique my interest even more, even though when I initially added these books to my TBR months ago, all I needed to know was the genre and the audience, and maybe like a little bit more than that, like maybe like the representation or something like that. But the closer it gets to the release date, I need to know the synopsis too, but that's just a personal thing. If you prefer me just focusing on my excitement for the book and not specifically going into like what the book is actually about, let me know. So anyway, the first book on this list is called 1,000 Steps into Night. This book comes out the 1st of March, and it's a YA Japanese-inspired fantasy. At least I think it's Japanese-inspired. I'm not specifically sure. I know it's Asian-inspired, but I don't know which specific East Asian country. Anyway, it's a YA fantasy, and it's written by the same author who wrote the Lillie trilogy, which is one of my favorite books of all time, and Chee is one of my favorite authors of all time, because her books are so incredible. This book follows a young girl, and I don't know specifically what her story is about, but I know this book has something to do with demons, adventures, and plans gone awry. But for me personally, all I needed to know is that it's written by Chee, who's a genius and a goddess and a queen. So I hope this book lives up to my expectations. It's also one of my most anticipated 2022 new releases because, like I mentioned, Chee is such a good author. So anyway, like I mentioned, I'm so excited for this book. It comes out the 1st of March. It's a YA Asian-inspired fantasy, and I'm absolutely so excited. The next book on this list is called Turning. This book also comes out the 1st of March, and it's a YA contemporary following a young black ballerina who's forced to confront her past after an injury forces her to reassess her future. This book sounds like it's going to be so good and so awesome. First of all, the cover is so pretty and it looks so cool. Second of all, I love to see more disability representation. Third of all, I love books with black people in the center of them, because as a black person myself, I love to see that type of representation. Fourth of all, I love books that focus on a sport that I was previously in at one point. I mean, I never did dance competitively, but I do enjoy it as an art form because I think it's so pretty, especially ballet. Anyway, this book also kind of reminds me of The Other Side of Perfect in the sense that it follows a person of color, former ballerina. And if you didn't know, The Other Side of Perfect was one of my favorite books of 2021, which definitely amplifies my excitement and my anticipation for this book. But anyway, this book sounds like it's going to be so cool and so awesome. So like I mentioned, this book comes out the 1st of March, and I'm really, really excited. The next book on this list is called Lakelore. This book is a YA magical realism story following two non-binary, neurodivergent characters, and it comes out the 8th of March. I'm so excited to read this book because if you didn't know, this author previously wrote the Mirror season last year, which again was one of my favorite books of 2021. So naturally, I have very high expectations for this book. Magical realism for me as a genre is typically hit or miss, but with this author, they typically write it so beautifully and so lyrically that I can't help but fall in love with everything that's happening, and I love that they have such casual queer representation, so we love to see it. So I'm so excited to read this book because it sounds so awesome and so cool. If I'm being honest with you, the synopsis, I don't really quite remember what it's about, but I do know that the two main characters both use they, them pronouns, and they're both neurodivergent, so we love to see it. So anyway, like I mentioned earlier, this book comes out the 8th of March, and I'm really, really excited. The next book on this list is called One for All. This book also comes out the 8th of March, and it's a YA gender-bent retelling of the Three Musketeers, and it also has Own Voices disability representation, and I'm so excited. First of all, I love casual disability representation. I also love hard-hitting disability representation, but I really enjoy both. Anyway, I also love the fact that it's a Three Musketeers retelling, because since I've never read the original story, this means that I will have no idea what to expect from the plot or from the story or anything like that. And I've heard that the story tackles the main character finding self-love, which I really appreciate, and sisterhood, which sounds so cool and so awesome. So I have really high expectations for this book because it sounds so awesome and so cool and so well done. So anyway, like I mentioned earlier, this book comes out the 8th of March, and I'm really excited for it. The next book on this list also comes out the 8th of March, and it's called A Far Wilder Magic. This book is a YA fantasy with Jewish and dyslexic main characters, so we love to see casual disability and religious representation, and it follows an unlikely pair who are working together because they have a common ground, but if I'm being honest with you, I don't remember why they're working together or what their common ground is, but I am very, very excited to figure out what it is, because this author previously wrote Down Comes the Night last year, which was so good and so well done. She is so good at crafting a wonderful gothic setting, and I'm so excited for this book because I know it's going to be so good. One of my friends has already read it, and she really liked it, so I hope that I will also really like it too. Down Comes the Night was literally so good, so I really hope that this book lives up to that expectation. So anyway, like I mentioned earlier, this book comes out the 8th of March, and I'm so excited to read it. The next book on this list is called Kiss and Tell. This book comes out the 22nd of March, and it's a YA contemporary following a young queer boy who's the only queer member of his boy band, and it sounds so cool and so inventive. First of all, this author previously wrote the Darius the Great duology, which I really liked, so now naturally I have very high expectations for this book. This book is also one of my most anticipated 2022 new releases, so I'm so excited. I have such high expectations for this book. I believe the story tackles the fact that, like I mentioned, the main character is the only queer member of his boy band, so he has to navigate that and what the label wants from him and what he wants for himself. So that sounds so cool, and I'm also hoping that the author will incorporate many musical elements in the story, since obviously he's in a boy band, which sounds so awesome and so well done. So anyway, I'm really looking forward to this book. I have really high expectations, and I really hope that the story lives up to those expectations. The next book on this list also comes out the 22nd of March, and it's called Ellen Outside the Lines. This book is also one of my most anticipated 2022 new releases because it's written by the same author of Anna on the Edge, which was one of my most favorites of 2020. So naturally I have very high expectations for this book. It's another middle-grade contemporary, and it follows a young autistic queer person who's navigating themselves during a school trip, which sounds so cool and so awesome. So like I mentioned earlier, Anna on the Edge was so awesome, and it was so good. So naturally I have very, very high expectations for this book. It sounds so awesome and so well done. I love it when middle-grade stories tackle a main character who's navigating who they are and navigating their queer identity and their autistic identity and everything else. And I also love reading about autistic children because at one point in my life I was an autistic child, and in some ways I still feel like that. So in that sense, I'm hoping that this story will be relatable. But anyway, this story sounds so awesome and so well done. So like I mentioned earlier, I'm really looking forward to it. The next book on this list is called Survive the Dome. This book comes out the 29th of March, and I'm really excited for it. It's a YA science fiction story following a young, black, queer main character who's a journalist, and he's trapped inside of a dome that's keeping information out and residents in, and it's recently after a black person got killed by a cop. So I'm really hoping that this author will tackle the sensitivity of police brutality. So I'm really looking forward to this book. This author previously wrote Yesterday's History, which was one of my almost favorites of 2021. So naturally, I have very, very high expectations for this book. The concept sounds so inventive and so awesome, and I'm wondering now if the dome is supposed to be like a parallel to something in real life. You know what I mean? Like, so often when I read science fiction, I know that the author is trying to parallel it to something that happens in real life. So I'm wondering if this author is doing the same. But anyway, I'm so excited to read this book because it sounds so awesome and so cool. And I have really, really high expectations because I enjoyed Yesterday is History so much. So anyway, like I mentioned, this book comes out the 29th of March, and I'm really looking forward to it. The next book on this list is called A Magic Steeped in Poison, and it's a YA Chinese-inspired fantasy, and it comes out the 29th of March, and it follows a young girl who enters a magical tea brewing competition to save her dying sister, and it's marketed for fans of Adrian Young and Lee Verdugo, whom I love. So naturally, I'm so excited for this book. It sounds so awesome and so cool. But first of all, the cover is so pretty, and it's so eye-catching, and it's absolutely so beautiful. So I really hope that the story inside is also just as pretty. Second of all, I love it when fantasy stories tackle a competition setting because it's so awesome, and I have no idea what to expect. Like, what happens if they win? What happens if they lose? How does cheating work? Like, is cheating allowed? Like, it sounds so cool. Also, a magical tea brewing competition. Like, how do you make tea brewing magical and fantastical? You know what I mean? Also, the concept of this book low-key reminds me of Empress of All Seasons, which was so cool, at least with the competition. Anyway, it sounds so awesome and so cool, so I really hope this story is so inventive and so well done. Anyway, this book sounds so amazing, and I'm really looking forward to it. So like I mentioned, it comes out the 29th of March. The last book on this list, and certainly not the least, also comes out the 29th of March, and it's called A Forgery of Roses. This book is a YA gothic fantasy murder mystery because it follows a young girl who has the magical secret power to alter people's bodies through portraits, which first of all sounds so cool and so inventive, but when her power is discovered, she is given the task of resurrecting a dead person. So that's fun. This author previously wrote Sing Me Forgotten last year, which was so awesome and so inventive and so unique. So naturally, I have very, very high expectations for this book. It sounds so cool, and I also heard that there's own voices anxiety representation. So again, we love to see casual mental health representation. This book sounds so cool and so awesome. Like, how on earth do you alter somebody's body through a portrait? Like, what the hell? What on earth does that mean? Second of all, what's a forgery of roses? Like, what does the title mean? Does the title have significance? It must, but I don't know what it means. Third of all, this author is so talented and so good at writing such a unique, inventive YA fantasy. Sing with Forgotten is so underrated and it deserves so much more hype. So anyway, I'm really looking forward to this book because I have very high expectations. So, in conclusion, for some of these books, I gave you a more detailed, more in-depth synopsis, as well as my excitement for the book, but for others, I gave you a less detailed synopsis in addition to my anticipation and excitement. So, let me know which one you prefer. However, if you don't have a preference at all, let me know that too. So, anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please don't hesitate to give it a big thumbs up. Comment down below the sheep emoji if you made it all the way to the end of the video. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to my channel if you're new, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!